The thing about military academy inspections is that nobody tells you when the inspector is planning to invade your planet. I figured this out approximately 3 hours into what was supposed to be a routine joint training exercise at the Velkara Orbital Academy, when I noticed that our observer, a slate-gray alien built like a filing cabinet with too many joints, was taking notes with the kind of intensity usually reserved for war crimes tribunals. "Kim," said Gutierrez over our squad channel, "is it just me, or is that instructor looking at us like we're an asteroid on a collision course?" "It's not just you," I said, wrestling with a recalcitrant gravity generator that had decided now was a great time to start making a noise like a cat being murdered. "But let's focus on not dying before we worry about whatever his damage is." The simple construction drill had dumped us on a barren moon with enough equipment to build an emergency habitat rated for 20 people and enough time to do it before the thin atmosphere froze solid. Standard military academy stuff: build fast, build functional, don't die. The Velkara were supposed to be observing our construction protocols for some kind of interspecies cooperation report. What they hadn't mentioned was that the gravity generators they'd given us were manufactured sometime during the Bronze Age, or whatever the Velkara equivalent of the Bronze Age was, possibly the Age of Optimistic Thinking. "Atmosphere integrity at 60%, reported Patel from her position at the environmental controls. She had the kind of calm voice that made you think everything was fine right up until the moment everyone died. "Dropping faster than projected." "Define faster," I said. "We have 90 minutes before we're breathing vacuum." I looked at the habitat frame. We'd gotten the support structure up, but the sealant panels weren't going to bond properly in this cold, and the backup generator I was currently intimate with had just made a clicking sound that my engineering instructor back on Earth would have described as pre-catastrophic failure. Gutierrez appeared at my elbow. "Tell me you're fixing that." "I'm doing something to it," I said. "Whether it counts as fixing is between me and God." "Kim, we need that generator. The primary can't maintain pressure on its own." I knew that. The problem was that the coupling joint had cracked, thermal expansion probably, or maybe just spite, and the replacement parts we'd been given didn't fit because of course they didn't. Different threading standards. The Velkara used some kind of micro-adjustment system that required specialized tools we didn't have. I looked at my helmet, looked at the coupling, looked at Gutierrez. "How attached are you to your helmet?" I asked. "Very, it's between me and the vacuum of space. I need something to use as a hammer." Gutierrez stared at me, then because we'd been through enough training exercises together that he'd learned to just roll with it, he handed over his helmet. "If I die, I'm haunting you. Get in line." I used the helmet to pound the Velkara coupling into a shape that resembled what it should have been originally, then wrapped the threads with the metallized film from my emergency ration pack, which wasn't rated as a pressure seal, but was better than nothing, and torqued the whole assembly together with a combination of brute force and prayer. The generator coughed, whined, and settled into something that almost sounded like a proper running state. "We're back to 85% output," Patel called. "That's actually workable." "MacGyver was a documentary," I told Gutierrez, handing back his dented helmet. "I don't know what that means." "It means we're going to live long enough for you to buy me a beer." Up in the observation station, SH Ket watched the human cadet repair the gravity generator with a helmet and a ration wrapper, and felt his primary heart do something that might have been admiration and might have been horror. He added another line to his assessment file: "Humans treat equipment failure as a creative opportunity rather than a terminal condition. Threat level, escalating." The file he was compiling had a single purpose: to determine whether humanity represented an acceptable risk to Velkara interests, or whether preemptive action was required. The more he watched these cadets, the more convinced he became that humanity was the most dangerous species to enter galactic society in 300 years. They didn't follow protocols, they didn't respect limitations, they treated impossible situations as minor inconveniences requiring improvisation. Which would have been concerning enough if these were trained Special Forces operators, but these were children, barely 20 cycles old, most of them. They hadn't even finished their training. And they'd just solved a problem that should have required an engineering team and specialized equipment using garbage and audacity. SHCat's superior, Commander T-Val, appeared on his comm screen. Status report. The human cadets have established primary habitat structure, SHCat said, ahead of timeline. And your assessment? SHCat looked at the feed showing Kim and her team running sealant lines while singing something in their language. Apparently humans worked better when making coordinated noise and tried to find words that would convey what he was witnessing. Inconclusive, he said finally, requesting extended observation period. T-Val's crest flattened in disapproval. You have 48 hours, then I want your recommendation on whether humanity requires containment measures. The channel closed. SHCat looked back at the humans. They'd gotten the habitat sealed and were now arguing about whether to install the communications array before or after the water reclamation system. The argument involved a lot of hand gestures and what appeared to be good-natured insults. One of them, Gutierrez, won the argument by pulling rank. The others complained loudly but complied immediately. SHCat made another note: chain of command functions through consensus and mockery. Unit cohesion appears to strengthen under stress rather than fracture. Down on the surface, Kim stood back and looked at their work. The habitat wasn't pretty, it looked like something assembled by extremely motivated raccoons, but it was functional, sealed, and warming up to survivable temperatures. Well, she said, we're not dead. I'm putting that on my performance review, said Gutierrez. Under achievements. Think we passed inspection? Asked Patel. I looked up at the orbital station where I knew the Velkara observers were watching. Something about the way that slate-gray instructor had been looking at us bothered me. It wasn't the look of someone grading a training exercise. It was the look of someone deciding whether we were a problem that needed solving. I don't think, I said slowly, that this was ever about passing. SHCat had spent 30 years in military intelligence, which meant he knew exactly how dangerous it was when someone asked, how hard could it be? The human cadet, Kim, had just asked exactly that question while looking at the Phase 2 requirements for the training exercise. Phase 2 involved establishing functional colony infrastructure, water processing, power grid, basic manufacturing capability. The timeline was 48 hours. The expectation was that the cadets would establish minimum viable systems and call it done. Kim looked at her team and said, we're already here, how hard could it be to actually do it right? SHCat felt his secondary heart skip. What followed was not a training exercise, it was a controlled explosion of human ambition. The cadets divided into teams with the kind of efficiency that suggested they'd worked together before. Kim took environmental systems. Gutierrez grabbed power and structural. Patel claimed manufacturing and logistics. The fourth cadet, Brennan, who'd been quiet up until now, apparently specialized in mining and raw materials. That should have been a problem because the equipment provided for the exercise was designed for basic assembly of prefabricated components, not for building things from scratch. The humans looked at the equipment, looked at each other, and apparently decided that designed for was a suggestion rather than a limitation. Brennan took the rock sampling tools and converted them into a mining array. This required disassembling two different pieces of equipment and reassembling them into something that definitely violated at least 3 safety protocols but absolutely worked. Are they aware, T-Val said over the command channel, that those tools are not rated for industrial excavation? I don't believe they care, Commander, SHCat replied, watching Brennan set up a mining pattern that would have impressed a professional geological survey team. Within 6 hours, the humans had established a processing pipeline that went from raw regolith to refined materials. They'd also established a work rotation that ignored their species' biological requirements. SHCat had researched human physiology. They needed approximately 8 hours of unconsciousness per cycle and required regular rest periods to prevent cognitive degradation. The cadets were working 12-hour shifts with 20-minute breaks. Kim, Gutierrez said over their open channel, you've been up for 16 hours. So have you, Kim replied. She was elbow-deep in the water reclamation system doing something that involved a lot of swearing. I slept for 4 hours. 4 hours is basically a full night. Kim, I'll sleep when the water system isn't trying to kill me. She said this cheerfully, like equipment malfunction was a form of entertainment rather than a critical failure. Patel joined the conversation. The fabrication system is online. I can start printing replacement parts if you tell me what's broken. Everything, Kim said, but specifically the pressure regulator and the filtration array. They're arguing about which one gets to fail first. Sending the specs to your helmet display, Patel said. Parts will be ready in 2 hours. You're a goddess. I know. SH listened to them work. They complained constantly about the equipment, about the environment, about each other, but they never stopped. When Brennan injured his hand in a mining accident, he wrapped it in medical film and kept working with his offhand while Gutierrez took over the tasks that required dexterity. When the primary power cell overloaded and nearly killed Patel, she spent 20 minutes unconscious, woke up, and immediately asked for a status update on the manufacturing queue. These weren't soldiers demonstrating unit cohesion. This was something else, something SH didn't have words for in his language. His people worked in specialized roles with clear delineation of responsibility. When a Velkara was injured, they were removed from the task rotation pending medical clearance. When equipment failed, it was replaced according to protocol. Humans appeared to operate on the principle that problems were personally offensive and required immediate, creative vengeance. By hour 36, they'd completed the infrastructure requirements. Water, power, manufacturing, environmental control, all functional, all rated for 20 inhabitants as specified. Then they didn't stop. We've got 12 hours left, Kim said, looking at something on her display. And we've got extra raw materials from Brennan's enthusiasm with the mining rig. I was efficient, Brennan protested. You strip-mined half the crater. It was a small crater. What are you thinking? Gutierrez asked Kim. She pulled up a schematic that made SH tertiary heart skip, greenhouse. We don't have the specs for a greenhouse, Patel said. So we make them up. Kim, that's not how engineering works. Sure it is, engineering is just applied physics with optimism. They built the greenhouse in 11 hours. It shouldn't have been possible. The environmental tolerances alone required calculations that should have taken longer than the time they had available. But Kim apparently did math the same way she did engineering, aggressively and with insufficient respect for limitations. The structure went up in a frame that Brennan welded together from mining equipment they'd already cannibalized twice. The sealant was a composite that Patel fabricated using a formula she derived by testing different ratios until something worked. The environmental controls were Kim's water system with additional components that she swore would maintain the right atmosphere for plant growth. When they finished, Gutierrez looked at the completed greenhouse and said, "We don't have any plants." Kim grinned. It was the first time SH had seen a human expression that genuinely frightened him. She reached into her personal kit and pulled out a small container of seeds. You brought seeds to a military training exercise, Brennan asked. I bring seeds everywhere, Kim said. You never know when you'll need to start a garden. They planted them together, all 4 cadets working in the soil that shouldn't support life on a moon that was barely habitable, putting seeds into dirt like it meant something. SH watched them and thought about the report he was supposed to file. The report that would recommend whether humanity should be preemptively contained before they became a threat. He opened his secure channel, pulled up the encrypted file, the one that would go directly to the Defense Council with his assessment. His hand hovered over the transmission key. The humans were singing again. Something about dirt and growing things and hope. Their voices carried over the comm channel, off-key and absolutely sincere. SH didn't press the key. Not yet. He needed to understand what he was watching before he decided whether it needed to be stopped. Down in the greenhouse, Kim patted the soil over the last seed and stood up. Her back was probably killing her. She'd been working for 18 hours straight. She should have been collapsing from exhaustion. Instead, she looked at Gutierrez and said, "You think they'll grow?" On a hostile moon with improvised environmental controls and dirt that's basically crushed rock, Gutierrez looked at the planted rows. Yeah, they'll grow. How do you know? He smiled because we told them to. The final exam was supposed to be a planetary defense scenario, which is what SHK kept telling himself when the actual asteroid showed up. The simulation had been scheduled for hour 47 of the exercise. A fake threat tracked response protocols, graded decision-making under pressure, standard academy curriculum. Instead, at hour 46, the proximity alarms started screaming and the threat board lit up with something very real. "Rogue asteroid," T-Val announced over the command channel. His voice had the particular flatness that Velkara developed when processing information they didn't want to be true. "Impact trajectory, training site Delta 7. Delta 7 was the moon, our moon, the one with the humans on it. SHK pulled up the trajectory data and felt his primary heart stop. Time to impact. 2 hours 17 minutes. Evacuation time. 4 hours minimum. We don't have enough transport capacity to retrieve all personnel before impact." On the command deck, the other instructors were already running calculations, determining acceptable losses, prioritizing senior staff and specialists. Standard military protocol in an impossible situation. SHK opened the channel to the human cadets. "Kim, we have a situation." Her voice came back immediate and calm. "We saw the alert, that's a real asteroid, isn't it?" "Yes, we're implementing evacuation protocols." "How long do we have?" "Impact in 2 hours 15 minutes, but evacuation will take." "How long do we have?" she repeated. "Before you need us off the surface to make room for other personnel." SHK looked at the evacuation queue. The humans were at the bottom of the priority list because of course they were. Junior cadets, foreign nationals, acceptable losses. 2 hours, he said quietly. "You have 2 hours." There was a pause. He heard conversation in the background, rapid human speech with that particular cadence that preceded either brilliance or catastrophe. Kim came back on. "We need access to the construction equipment, the heavy fabricators." "Kim, you need to prepare for evacuation." "We're not evacuating, we're fixing this. We need the military-grade matter compilers, the ones you use for emergency construction." T-Val cut into the channel. "Absolutely not, that equipment is restricted." "Commander," Kim said, and her voice had changed. No more jokes, no more casual defiance. This was the voice of someone who'd done the math and didn't like the answer but was going to work the problem anyway. "You have 40 personnel on this moon, the asteroid is 1,400 tons. Impact velocity will crack this rock like an egg and everyone dies. Or you give us 2 hours and the fabricators and maybe we don't." "What are you proposing?" "We build an interceptor, kinetic impactor. We've got the mining charges from Brennan's overly enthusiastic excavation, we've got the materials, we've got the fabrication systems. We turn your construction equipment into a missile and we shoot that rock." T-Val's crest flattened completely. "That is not a viable." "Do you have another option?" Kim asked, "because I'm not hearing one." The command deck was silent. SHK made a decision that would probably end his career. He activated his override codes and unlocked the military fabrication systems. "You have access, 2 hours." "Thank you," Kim said. Then to her team, "Gutierrez, I need thrust calculations. Patel, you're on guidance systems. Brennan, start prepping the explosive payload. We're building a missile." What happened next was controlled chaos with a soundtrack. The humans took everything they'd built, the habitat, the greenhouse, the processing systems, and cannibalized it. They ripped components out of working systems to build something that had never been designed, with tolerances that shouldn't work, on a timeline that was insulting. SHK watched them work and realized he was seeing something his people had lost. The Velkara built according to plans, specifications, tested protocols. They did what was proven to work. Humans did what needed doing and figured out the proving part later. At 90 minutes, they had something that looked like a missile if you squinted and had a generous definition of what qualified as flight capable. "Launch window in 20 minutes, Gutierrez called. "Guidance system is functional," Patel reported. "Barely, it's going to be manual corrections." "Can you hit it?" Kim asked. "I can hit something, whether it's the asteroid or random space is honestly 50-50. I'll take those odds." They launched at 92 minutes. The missile streaked up from the surface on a pillar of fire that was probably improvised rocket fuel and possibly prayer. SHKET tracked its trajectory. The guidance system was drunk, the missile wobbled, corrected, overcorrected, but Patel was making real-time adjustments, and somehow, impossibly, the missile was going to hit. It did. The asteroid vaporized in a flash that temporarily blinded every sensor pointed at it. Then the proximity alarms started again. Secondary impacts, TVAL said. The asteroid fragmented, multiple pieces incoming. SHKET pulled up the trajectory data. 12 major fragments all going to hit the moon, smaller than the original asteroid but collectively just as lethal. Evacuation now, TVAL ordered. All personnel to transport ships immediately. On the surface, Kim looked at her team. The habitat shields can be reconfigured if we redirect them to cover the impact zones. We won't have time to get to shelter, Gutierrez said. I know. They looked at each other. SHKET watched 4 human cadets, barely adults, have an entire conversation without saying a word. Then they moved. They sprinted back to the habitat, their habitat, the one they'd built and improved and planted gardens in, and started ripping into the shield systems, redirecting emitters, rewriting targeting protocols, doing it manually because there wasn't time for anything else. SHKET abandoned his post, left the command deck at a run, got to the transport bay and commandeered a shuttle. Where are you going? TVAL demanded. To get them. He broke every flight regulation getting to the surface. The first fragments were already hitting flashes on the horizon where kinetic energy turned into heat and light. The reconfigured shields were holding, barely. The humans were still outside, still working, adjusting the emitters as each impact shifted the structural dynamics. Kim, SHKET's voice came over her helmet comm. You need to get inside. 30 more seconds. You don't have 30 seconds. Then I'll work faster. The final fragment came down right on top of them. The shields held, the shockwave didn't. SHKET's shuttle landed in a crater that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. He ran to where the humans had been working, found them scattered, unconscious, their suits breached in multiple places. He carried them to the shuttle one by one. Kim last, because she was lightest and he was tired and terrified and didn't want to think about what it meant that he'd prioritized them by weight rather than strategic value. In the medical bay later, he sat by Kim's bed and wrote his report. Not the one about threat assessment. A different one. Subject: Humanity Alliance Recommendation. 30 years in military intelligence has taught me to identify threats. I have watched the human cadets for 72 hours. I have documented their improvisation, their disregard for safety protocols, their refusal to accept limitations. This is my assessment: humanity does not conquer, humanity adopts. They did not build a habitat, they built a home. They planted gardens in hostile soil. When an asteroid threatened that home, they defended it. They did not calculate acceptable losses, they calculated how to make the losses unacceptable. Any species that attempts preemptive action against humanity will discover they have made family into enemies. The humans do not have our technological superiority. They do not have our strategic experience. What they have is the absolute inability to accept that something is impossible and the stubbornness to prove themselves right. Do not recommend containment, recommend alliance. Because the alternative is that someday someone will threaten something they've decided to protect. And I have seen what they can build in 90 minutes when they're properly motivated. I do not want to see what they can destroy. Kim woke up to see SHKET standing guard at her door. Everything hurt. Her ribs felt like someone had used them for percussion practice. Her head was full of static. Did we pass? She asked. SHKET looked at her. This human child who'd turned construction equipment into a weapon, who'd stayed on the surface to save people she'd never met, who'd planted seeds in dead soil because she believed in growing things. You changed the test, he said. Kim smiled. It hurt, everything hurt, but she smiled anyway. Yeah, she said, we're good at that.